This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay,
good morning, Rabbi Sai. Here we are. It's Erev Tisha B'Av, Ches Av. So I want to speak in our first year about more of a Lamda She'inyan regarding Kinnus. I want to iron out an issue that is very well known, but I think is somewhat, and to some degree, misunderstood. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin on the pasuk in Eicha, Bachai Sivka Balayla. Bachai Sivka Balayla. She cries bitterly at night. Why at night? Why not during the day? You could cry anytime. What does it mean? She cries bitterly at night. It says the Gemara, Shekal haboicha balayla hashemea koiloi boicha kenegdai. When you hear crying at night, you cry along with it. There's something about the nighttime that's just irresistible. That when you hear crying, it just softens the heart and you cry with it. Maisa, b'yisha achas shecheinasa shel Rabbi Gamliel. There was a woman, the neighbor of Ram Gamliel, Shemeis Bina. Her son died. V'haisa boicha olav. And she was crying for him. Balayla at night. Ram Gamliel had a neighbor. Her son died and she was crying at night. By the way, do you know the neighbor of Ram Gamliel? Well, you should. Because everybody has a neighbor like this that's crying about something at night. And you should be aware of it. And if you don't know, you should know. Well, anyway, Shama Ram Gamliel heard Kaila, her voice, Ubacha Kenegda, and he cried along with her. Ad Shenashu Risayenav, till his eyelashes fell out. Very interesting. So Ram Gamliel had a neighbor, and she would cry at night, and he would cry along with her. And if you look in the Gemara there, he wasn't just crying, he was crying over the Churban Beis HaMikdash. How strange. By the way, the Yalkut Shimoni also says, Davar acher b'layla shekol ha'boicha b'layla koiloi nishma. Anyone who cries at night, their voice is heard. Davar acher b'layla shekol ha'boicha b'layla koichom azol izboch animai. Davar acher b'layla shekol ha'boicha b'layla shamea koiloi boicha kenegda ma'isa b'yishachas b'shcheinasa Shom Gamliel Shemeis Bina v'haisa boicha olav Shom Gamliel kol ubacha kenegda. Well, if you look in the Gemara there, the Gemara implies that Ram Gamliel would cry over the Churban Beis HaMikdash. And somehow the crying of this woman caused Ram Gamliel to cry over the Beis HaMikdash. And the question that is raised by the Talzer Rosh Hashiva, Rav Mordechai Gifter, is Miman Avshach. Was Ram Gamliel sad about the Churban Beis HaMikdash? Or was he not sad about the Churban Beis HaMikdash? If he was sad, then why would he need this woman to cry, for him to cry over the Beis HaMikdash? And if he wasn't sad, what did this woman crying over her son, how did that cause him to cry over of the Churban? He's not crying about the same thing she's crying about. She's crying about her personal tragedy. He's crying about the Churban. Is he sad or is he not sad? If he's sad about the Beis HaMikdash, then he should cry every night. And if he's not sad about the Beis HaMikdash, why would he cry tonight? That's the kasha. And from here we derive the following principle. And that is that all tragedy can be traced back to Churban Beis HaMikdash. All personal tragedy, all tragedy that people have in their personal lives, in their family lives, emotional distress, financial constraints, all difficulty could ultimately be traced back to the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom is being master panav mimena. The Rebbeinu Shalom is sort of the Hester panim. He's not close with us the way he once was, because the concept is that Beis HaMikdash equals Shechina, and Shechina equals Ha'aras panim, and Ha'aras panim means bracha. And when there's no Beis HaMikdash, that's synonymous with klala. And all difficulty in life could be traced back to the Churban. So when Ram Gamliel would hear the woman cry about her personal tragedy, he understood that ultimately it could be traced back. You know why this poor woman lost her child? Because we don't have the same level of hashgacha pratis that we once had. We don't have the same connection with the Rebbeinu Shalom that we once had. And Ram Gamliel cried because he understood that you could trace her personal tragedy back to the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi said this is a very important yesod of Tisha B'Av. This is one of the main principles of the Kinnus. How do I know that? Very simple. You know how I know that? Now let me ask you a question. Why in the world are we saying Kinnus for the Crusades on Tisha B'Av? They got nothing to do with Tisha B'Av. They happened in the year Tatnu, 1096. They didn't even happen on Tisha B'Av. What do they got to do with the Churban? Why do we say Kinnus for the Asar Harugei Malchus? Why do we say Kinnus, Shali Srufa Va'esh, for the burning of the Shas? What's that got to do with Tisha B'Av? Nothing to do with the Churban. So obviously the message is that all Jewish tragedy could be traced back to Churban Beis HaMikdash. Why are we saying Kinnus about Holocaust on Tisha B'Av? What the Holocaust got to do with the Churban Beis HaMikdash? The answer is all tragedy stems back to Hester Panim. And why is there Hester Panim? Because we live in a world without the Beis HaMikdash. That's the yesod of Rav Gifter, which we are going to very much modify.
Tragedies before the Churban Beis HaMikdash?
They got nothing to do with the Churban Beis. They got nothing to do with it. They're just side tragedies. If you look, we have over here the Sefer Oyhel Moshe. In Yanei HaMikdash V'Hagalos, he says, Shamati, Mimoy Rabbi, I heard from my Rabbi, Rav Mordechai Gifter, that the Chavetz Chaim used to say that the Welt makes a mistake. Most people, let's ask ourselves, which brachas do we have the most kavanah for?
Shemona, the first three brachas, Shemona.
No. Which brachos in Shemona Esrei do you have the most kavanah for? Most people, Rifa'inu and Baruch Aleinu. They want good health and they want money. Right? There's not a. You tell me. Which kavanah do you have the most? Most people, Rifa'inu and Baruch Aleinu. And less kavanah by Tikab Shefer Gadol. Less kavanah from Yerushalayim Mircha, less kavanah from Semach David. But it's a big mistake, because if we would have a Beis HaMikdash, we wouldn't have to daven for the other things, because we wouldn't have any of the other tzaros. And with this, Rav Gifter would explain the Gemara in Sanhedrin and the Yalkut Shimoni, that why would this woman's crying make Ram Gamliel cry? And the answer is, because Ram Gamliel understood that personal tragedy and all difficulties and all challenges in life all stem from Churban Beis HaMikdash. Again, like we mentioned, this is a concept which is very evident from the Kinnus. So for example, look at number 4. In number 4, this is Kinnah Chafhei. Miyitein Roshi Mayim. Miyitein Roshi Mayim ve'eni mekar noizlai. If only my head would be water and my eyes a source of flowing tears. Ve'evke kol yemoisai v'leilai, I would cry all day and all night, as chalalei tapai v'oilalai, for the slain of my children. V'sheishe kohalai, and the elders of my kehillah. Look in the next paragraph. This paragraph is a key paragraph, because after the Shoah, after the Holocaust, the issue came up, the issue arose, should a separate day of commemoration be instituted in commemoration of the Holocaust, Yom HaShoah. And this was brought up to many Gedolim, the Brisker Rav, Rav Moshe Feinstein. And they all said the following: no. Why? They said, we have to look at the words of this Kinnus. The words of the Kinnus are like this. This is going on the tragedy of the Crusades. You should know. You had Rashi, you had the Balei Tosfos. Why is there no calendar date to remember the tens, the hundreds of thousands of Jews massacred in 1096? Why didn't they make a date? Why didn't they make a date during the Yemei Sfira, a fast day, to commemorate those who were slain? So the Kinnah answers that question. Simuna al levavchem mispeid mar lekashra. Place on your heart a bitter elegy. Kishkula harigasam l'hisabel u'lisapra. Their murder is worthy and equal to mourn and to roll in dust. Kisreifas beis Elokeinu ha'ulam v'habira. Just like the burning of the temple. In other words, we are not underplaying. The reason why we don't mourn for the tragedy of the Crusades is not because we don't value it. No, says the Bankainen. The tragedy of the Crusades is equal to the Beis HaMikdash. So why don't we have a separate Tisha B'Av? We are not authorized to add holiday, appointed time for a breaking and for tragedy. Ve'ein lahaktim, we can't make it early. Zulasi la'acha, we can only put it on the date of Tisha B'Av. Tachas came therefore. Hayom livyasi a'ira. Today I will arouse my mourning. Ve'espeda ve'elila. I will eulogize, I will cry. Ve'evka b'nefesh mara, and I will weep with bitter crying. Al beis Yisrael ve'elam Hashem kinaflu b'charav. So Moshe said, Brisker Rav said, the Kinnah is addressing this question. Why didn't Rashi, why didn't the Balei Tosfos make a separate day of mourning for the Crusades? The answer is we are not authorized to. We could only do it on Tisha B'Av. And the question is why? Why are we not authorized to?
The Tisha B'Av represents a single day. All those other tragedies were not specifically one day. How would you choose which day to pick? It would be arbitrary.
Okay. That might be another problem with it. But here, the Kinnah is expressing the idea that ultimately we need to recognize that whether it's Crusades, whether it's Holocaust, they all stem from Churban Beis HaMikdash.
We had Tainus Esther that was established after the Churban.
Tainus Esther is not a Tainus of tragedy. Tainus Esther is a Tainus.
Tragedy was prevented.
They were Tainus Esther was because they went to destroy Amalek, and whenever they would fight a war, they would fast. It's not a Tainus. And also you had Anshe Knesset HaGdoila. You had men with Ruach HaKodesh. Well,
what was the purpose of Megillah's Tainus?
Megillah's Tainus were minor and minor festivals, no? They were holidays.
So they still call it Megillah's Tainus?
Those are days you're not allowed to fast. Except for, it was Nisbatel, except for Chanukah and Purim. So I want to read to you, so you say, did everybody feel that way? I want to read to you what Rabbi Soloveitchik writes about this. And then he has an amazing question, and I would like to offer an answer. Okay? Now, I really did not do this on purpose. Okay? You're going to have to take my word for this. The author of this Kinnah is the famous Kalonimus ben Yehuda, a member of an Italian family of Taitanim. I really did not know I was doing that. For that, you got to take me at face value. He settled in Germany. Rashi mentions the Rabbi Kalonimus, and the author of this Kinnah was a descendant of that Rabbi Kalonimus. It is interesting that a fast day was instituted on the 20th day of Sivan by Rabbeinu Tam to commemorate an attack against the Jews unrelated to the Crusades. Centuries later, when the Chelminetzky pogroms occurred in 1648, the 20th day of Sivan was proclaimed to be a fast day for both the persecutions against the German Jews and the Chelminetzky persecutions. There are slichos, penitential prayers composed for that day. Notwithstanding the tradition of observing the 20th day of Sivan, this Kinnah declares that Tisha B'Av is the exclusive fast day that commemorates all the tragedies that befell the Jewish people, and that no other fast day should be instituted for this purpose. Now, he doesn't ask the question, but he is asking a question. What's the question? If we're not allowed to add fast days, then how were they able to fast on the 20th day of Sivan? By the way, 20th day of Sivan is brought down in the Noisei Kelim on Shulchan Aruch, that the 20th day of Sivan is a fast day for the Chelminetzky pogroms. Well, wait a second. So then why can't we do that for the Holocaust? And That question he doesn't ask. He sets us up for it, but he doesn't ask it. But he does ask the following question. This is an amazing question. I do not know why there are no Kinnus recited on Tisha B'Av which commemorate Chelminetzky persecutions. The Kinnot that were composed to commemorate the Chelminetzky. Now we do say Slichos on Chav Sivan. There are Tefillah said, and we say it on Chav Sivan, and we don't say it on Tisha B'Av. The Kinnus that were composed to commemorate the Chelminetzky persecutions, and which are recited on 20th Sivan, are not said on Tisha B'Av. So this is a brisker kasha on this Kinnus. What's the kasha? Here we talk about Asara Harugei Malchus. We talk about crusades. We talk about the burning of the Talmud. Now, Holocaust, he wouldn't ask that because I am certain Rabbi Soloveitchik did not say the Kinnus for the Holocaust. I'm not a student of his, but from what I know, it probably went against every single thing he believed in. Because he was a very big believer, we don't add any tefillahs. We once gave a share on that. But his question is, why would we not say Kinnus for Chelminetzky pogroms? Good kasha, right?
What about the whole idea that
We
they
haven't-
actually established Chav Sivan as a special
Chav
day,
Sivan-
Okay.
and they didn't do it
was
for
more-
other...
Okay, so that I said is the question he doesn't ask.
But it's
He sets
implied.
us up for it, right? You're like, once he says it, how could you not ask it? Good question also. In other words, he doesn't ask it, but we could ask, right? What Chav Sivan? I thought the Kinnus says we can't add any days. The Kinnus says we can't add days. How could they add Chav Sivan? And the second question is, what? Second question is, the question he does ask is, why don't we say Kinnus for the Chelminetzky pogroms? That question made me think of another question. And this is a question that I'm going to speak about on Tisha B'Av. I'll just throw out the question to you, let you think about it. This I feel is a very good question. Tisha B'Av, we cry about Asar Harugei Malchus. It didn't even happen on Tisha B'Av. We cry about the Crusades. Didn't even happen on Tisha B'Av. We cry about the Holocaust. Didn't happen on Tisha B'Av. There is such a glaring omission on Tisha B'Av. I can't even believe it. There is one of the most major tragedies that ever happened in our history happened on Tisha B'Av, and we don't say a word about it.
Expulsion in Spain.
Spanish Inquisition. Not a word on Tisha B'Av. What happened? You ever think about that question? I think it's a very good question. And this Rabbi Soloveitchik's question made me think of it. And I think I have a good answer, but I don't want to ruin it for Tisha B'Av.
Can I suggest something?
Depends where
Is
you're
it
going to
possible, the Spanish Inquisition, although it was a tragedy in its time, because the Jews were thrown out of Spain, wasn't there habatzos Torah that might not have occurred otherwise in the long run because of that Inquisition?
Look, Spanish Inquisition, auto de fe, 30,000 Jews were burnt. 300,000 Jews were expelled. Something to think about.
Yeah, but the Holocaust with 6 million Jews was, in the long run, a much more...
I'm not saying not to say about the Holocaust, but you do say Asara Harugei Malchus. You do say Crusades. You know, Spanish Inquisition was a. The Rabbi says the worst thing that ever happened to Jewish people since the Churban Bayis. I think Spain was the epicenter of Torah Jewry in the 15th century, in the 13th century. All the Gedolim lived there. And it happened on Tisha B'Av. You know, to top it off, it happened on Tisha B'Av.
Yes. The Inquisition, yes.
The Inquisition.
Yeah, Jews were also...
Could someone write one kinna, please? You know, they're not that long. Just one kinna. Could we give to the Spanish Inquisition?
World War I broke out on Tisha B'Av.
Yes.
The Inquisition started on Tisha B'Av? Or
The date.
The expulsion
The
started.
expulsion.
Not the Inquisition.
Not the Inquisition. The expulsion.
So an expulsion is not the same.
Well, you know, whoever wasn't expelled
Who got killed.
was
They were forced to convert
either convert
or die.
or die.
Well, the Jews were expelled to Babel 2 years before the destruction. They don't do anything about that.
Expelled to Babel?
Yeah. Well, in a sense, they were...
That's the Churban, right? That was part of the Churban.
Right? 2 years before.
Where they were different. There's Galas Yichanya, Galas Yihayachin. Right? There were two. Okay, there at least, that's the whole thing. But that was a result of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So you could say that comes under the category of, even in Eicha itself, you have some prakim for the Churban, some prakim for the leaving of Eretz Yisrael. Parak Hey is the leaving of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so I don't know that we're ignoring. Okay, this is a question to think of. But here's the idea that we're saying is that all tragedy traces back to Churban. Look in the Gemara in Saita. The Gemara in Saita says, Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Heyed Rav Yeshua, Miyom Shecharav Beis HaMikdash, Ein Yom She'ein Boi Klala. From the day the temple is destroyed, we don't have a day that there's no curse. Yeah? I think elsewhere Chazal say, Ein Yom She'ein Klala Meruba Mishachavera. So Rabbi said we have two questions on our hands. The one question, the one that Rabbi Soloveitchik doesn't ask, and the one that he does ask. The one he doesn't ask is, how could we establish Chav Sivan? The one he does ask is, why are there no Kinnus for the Chelminetzky Pogroms? So what I would like to share with you is a tshuva from Rabbi Moshe, where he answers the question that Rabbi Soloveitchik does not ask, and we're going to use it to answer the question that Rabbi Soloveitchik does ask. They asked Rabbi Moshe, why weren't the Gedolim, why did they not establish a day of memorial for the Shoah? So you say they did. So one thing we learn here is no, it wasn't them. It wasn't the Gedolim who established that day. It was not an authorized, it was not endorsed by the Torah leaders. Right? The tshuva is on, V'tam shaloi tiknu yoim kavua l'tainus utfila l'zecher harugei Shoah. Why didn't they make a day? Uvidvar ha'gezeru shamosenu harabim nergu erach asora pa'amim shishim riboy al yidei harasham Hitler v'chaverov yimach shemoy. You see how Ramosha calls it? Hitler and his friends, not the Nazis. The Nazis is a liberal invention. Why? Because there were bad people called Nazis. But Avada, the Germans were all good people. The German nation in general, they're all good. It was the Nazis. No, make sure you don't say that. It was Germany. It was Poland.
France.
It was France.
Austria.
And America knew about it.
Sure.
Anyway. Shouldn't there be a day of fast? Shatama. Nothing's been done. Says Moshe, well, what do you mean nothing's been done? There's something called Tisha B'Av. Hine bekinnush shekol Yisrael ayrim b'Tisha B'Av mefurash shemash le'tiknu yom miyuchad l'tainus of chiyah gzeres ma'asois hatzlav. The reason why there is no day designated for crusades, shahayu ha'gzeres b'chol medinos Europe, that were throughout Europe, shagaru sham roiv ha'yehudim. Most Jews lived there at the time. V'nechravu kama ayoras u'krachim. V'nikra al shayim shnas tatnu. V'gam be'eretz Yisrael hargu sham harbe Yehudim. Mishum de'ein l'kvaya oid yoim l'tainus u'levchi. We can't add days. Shalchein tzarech la'askiram bekinnus ta'ar medishva l'chor me'mikdash. We include them in the Kinnus. By the way, it's interesting. Rav Soloveitchik in his Kinnus, I don't believe he said the Holocaust once.
No.
I think he was morally opposed to it. But throughout the Kinnus, wherever there was a recurring tragedy that, let's say, something happened by the Churban that also happened times of the Holocaust, he would point it out. In other words, to make the point that whatever, in kol chadash tachas hashamesh, history repeats itself. Umei oisoi tam atzmoi, ein likvaya yoim echad miyucha gam zer shebezmanenu. That's why we don't make a separate day for our times. V'hu bechlal kol hagzer shahayu b'meshach kol hagaras. Okay, so far so good. You ready? Here's the whopper. This is an amazing Chiddush. Ready for this Chiddush? But what happened to Chav Sivan? Why do we have a fast day on Chav Sivan? I'm going to tell you outside, and then we'll read inside. Says Rav Moshe, this idea that everything is traced back to the Churban, maybe very nebulously, if somebody Chas V'Shalom is ill, it's because there's Hester Ponim, it's because there's no Beis HaMikdash. But that's not a reason to include something in Tisha B'Av. to include a tragedy in Tisha B'Av, it has to be directly connected to the Churban. What kind of tragedy is directly connected to the Churban? Who caused the Churban? Who destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash? The Romans. The Western world. The Christian world. They were the predecessors of Christianity, but Rome. Anytime there's a tragedy that is perpetrated by the prevailing empire of the Gullus that we're in, that is directly connected to the Churban. That's why we could say Kinnus for the Crusades. That's why we could say Kinnus for the burning of the Shas, because it was done by the Christians. That's why we could say maybe Kinnus for the Holocaust. But the Chelminetzky pogroms, says Moshe, they weren't perpetrated by the reigning empire. They were done by a bunch of rebels. Chelminetzky was the chief Cossack. They were rebels. They were rebelling against the government. That has nothing to do with the Churban. Churban is only when you could connect it to the power of the Roman Empire. When you could connect it to the power of the Golas that we're in. But when it's rebels rebelling against the government, that has nothing to do with the Churban. That's, says Moshe. That's why Chav Sivan. You know why we can have a separate day for the Chelminetzky pogroms? Because it doesn't trace back to Tisha B'Av. Because the Chelminetzky pogrom was not perpetrated by the government, it was perpetrated by the anti-government. Memela, you have a Tisha B'Av, and you have a Chav Sivan. But Hitler was
He was a rebel. He was against the original German government.
Yeah, but
he was
he was voted in.
He became the government because he was a rebel.
No, he was voted in by the Jews. We voted for him. He was elected. He is the presiding leader of the empire of Golos. Memela, that's connected to Tisha B'Av. But Chelminetzky pogrom got nothing to do with Tisha B'Av. And therefore, they were rebelling against the government. Therefore, you can have a Chav Sivan. So I just want to point out that based on Rav Moshe, we have a very clear answer to Rav Soloveitchik's question. Rav Soloveitchik, no, so the Inquisition was Christianity. I'm not answering Inquisition. Inquisition, you have to come to the shul on Tisha B'Av to hear the answer. But 9 o'clock, it's the corner of Branch and Peninsula. That Shachris is 9 o'clock, and then we have Kinnus 9:45, and you'll hear the answer to that question. Rabbi Soloveitchik writes, I do not know why there's no Kinnus Risan Tisha B'Av for Chelminetzky. I believe according to Rav Moshe we have a very clear answer. Rav Moshe is explaining why you could have a Chav Sivan even though we have a Tisha B'Av. That's because Chelminetzky has nothing to do with Tisha B'Av. This would be an answer why there are no Kinnus for Chelminetzky pogroms. Because it's got nothing to do with Tisha B'Av. Why would you say anything about Chelminetzky on Tisha B'Av? Yeah, Asar Arugei Malchus killed by the Romans. Crusades, the Romans. Holocaust, Western world. Hitler had an alliance with the Pope, right?
What about all the Arab countries and Muslims?
Maybe that is why we don't say anything of Kinnus about anything that happened. I always thought, why don't we say anything to all the tragedies that the Arabs inflicted on us all the years? So I always thought, look, Minhag Ashkenaz, we weren't suffering under them. We were suffering under what happened in Europe. Maybe the Sfaradim do. No, according to this, so it's not a day to commemorate, Arab tragedy. Now, they have nothing to do with the Churban. They're just bad. They were always bad. They were Pera Adam, and they're still Pera Adam. It has nothing to do with the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Look in the last paragraph. V'loi domi l'gzeros d'shnas he'alafim tach v'talidei Chelminetzky roish hakazakin. Says Rav Moshe, this has nothing to do with the fact that we still fast on the 20th day of Sivan for the Chelminetzky pogroms, the head of the chief Cossack, shenergu b'Ukraina v'chelak mu'Poland, who they killed in the Ukraine and part of Poland. Shekavu sham yoim tainus amir slichas la'esrim b'Sivan mishum shaloi hoysazu gezera klolis k'gzeras hagolis v'achurban. First of all, says Rav Moshe, it's not similar to the Churban. It was very specific to that region. It wasn't to all of Klal Yisrael. Elarak b'chelak medina achas, only to the Ukraine and part of Poland. Shahoisa gezer noisa v'zal yisam makomis. V'gam gezer zu d'shnas tach v'tad loy hoisa idei amalchiyos umemel loy nimshecha me'etzem hagolos v'achorban. It did not stem from the etzem golos. Elohoisa Idei Hamordim HaMalchus came from rebels. Shaloi Shayich Zeh Kol Kach Lama Shahoya Zeh B'Golos. This is not really so connected to what was in Golos. During the 1648-1649, if the government was strong enough, they would have protected us. But the Chelminetzky was a rebel. We only commemorate on Tisha B'Av those tragedies that are befalling us for the same sins that caused the Churban. So, if it's a matter of the prevailing government, that means Rebbe Shalom put us in Galus. We're at the whim of the Ummah Yisraelim. That means the Averos that caused the Churban are still haunting us. Shalachein hayashayich l'sakin tainis amir slicha. Says Moshe, Chaf Sivan is authorized. A day for the Holocaust is not authorized. Uloisanam becomes Savad. Al Gzeros to Hitler. Hitler's Gzeros were on all of Klal Yisrael. Say, what are you talking about? Yeah. First of all, Hitler was inches away from blitzing right through Israel. Don't say it was only on the Jews of Europe. Hitler was at the Sinai. Yeah. And what do you say? What about the Jews of America? Hitler felt the Jews of America, they would destroy themselves. They would intermarry.
And he had submarines off the East Coast.
Basically, Hitler, first of all, wiped out the main locations where Klal Yisrael lived. Harag es Kol Yisrael. His plan was to destroy the whole world. That's a gzera on all of Klal Yisrael. That's a gzera that's connected to the Churban, and therefore we don't make a separate day of Tainus and Bechia like we find in the Kinnus. So this is a very interesting split between Chaf Sivan and the Holocaust. Chaf Sivan. What?
Why don't we observe Chaf?
We're very weak darts. It's not easy.
Yeah.
What?
That's embarrassing.
Chayra.
Who established a Torah table to commemorate?
It's Midivrei Nevi'im.
Yeah.
Yechezkel.
We do have Yom HaShoah, and then we do another one on a Torah table. Who?
Oh, the Yom HaKadosh HaKloli?
Yeah. Who did that?
Young Israel of Kugarn Hills? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe some Rabbanut? I don't know. What do you mean established? It's not an establishment. It's not a kvius.
Not stir up.
Look, it's a big tragedy. Holocaust is something that happened and something that needs to be remembered, and people want to make it more personal than to let it be swallowed up in Tisha B'Av. So that's the debate. But to be koiveya, we don't have the authority to do that. One of the reasons is, like mentioned in Kinnus, because we connect it to Tisha B'Av. But the big question is, but look, we have precedent to make days. We have Chaf Sivan. So that's where Moshe distinguishes between those tragedies that are traced back. So bottom line is like this. Yes, there is definitely an idea that if a person has any difficulty, to some extent it's all traceable back to Tisha B'Av. But halachically speaking, in terms of what Kinnus we say on Tisha B'Av, according to our Moshe, we only say those Kinnus which are directly connected to Churban Beis HaMikdash, other side Kinnus. And that really makes the question stronger because the Spanish Inquisition was directly connected to the newly embraced Christianity. So stay tuned for the answer to that question.
Did grandfather say the one for the home?
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.